Hello again. So we're going to continue our look at culture by talking about diffusion and hearths and further differences in local or folk culture and popular, or another word for it, modern culture. So, cultural diffusion, we know the word diffusion refers to the spread of some kind of cultural element. So, and also the hearth is the origin place. It's the place where some kind of component of living, some kind of human environmental interaction began or originated, and then the diffusion is the movement, the spread from one place to the next. So, cultural elements like the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes that we talked about in our definition of culture, cultural elements spread from one place to the other for various reasons. One of the most common reasons is economic. Is it going to make people money? So for instance, 20 years ago, definitely when I was a college student, more than 20 years ago, there was not a sushi counter in Kroger with $5 sushi day, for instance. And you probably would never see a little set of chopsticks to be able to choose from instead of a knife, fork, or spoon on a deli counter. And so these kinds of aspects of material culture, or even the non-material notion of eating sushi in general, these kinds of things have diffused from their hearth of origin in Japan to the Kroger sushi counter. And if you have a Japanese person look at the offerings in the Kroger sushi counter, they will question significantly things like cream cheese and all of the mayonnaise-y kind of stuff that's on some of the sushi that is made for the USA consumer. And so cultural diffusion occurs when elements of one culture spread to other areas through some kind of migration, human environmental interaction, or any of the other aspects of Mr. Help that apply. So, a hearth is where it originates, and not all cultural components spread out evenly from the hearth. Sometimes it's an uneven distribution of these cultural elements. In other situations, cultural elements that come from popular or modern culture are resisted in certain kinds of homogenous or cultures that want to preserve local or folk or indigenous cultures that want to preserve a way of life and protect it from outside influences. So local culture or folk culture, indigenous culture, a word that I mentioned just now, indigenous means origin, the original people, for instance, are the Native Americans on this soil. So local or folk cultures often resist cultural diffusion from larger, more modern cultural components. And when I say modern, that's a synonym for popular culture, like we discussed in a previous video. And popular culture or modern culture changes really, really fast. So you might have somebody sing a song on American Idol that they wrote themselves, and all of a sudden next week it's like #1 in the charts. And then the following week there's a different song that's #1 in the charts. So popular culture and modern culture is really driven by economic situations, driven by that first world pattern of living where we don't really focus so much on subsistence or poverty or those kinds of things. We have the luxury, if you'll allow me to say the word luxury, of worrying about a lot of different things, like public image or social identity, self-identity, these kinds of things. So popular and modern culture is the global kind of culture that spreads very quickly, spreads very rapidly, and doesn't necessarily always maintain its original purpose or its original meaning when it arrives at a new place. Local culture, folk culture, the intention is not at all to spread local or folk culture from one place to the next, rather to resist change. Local and folk culture tends to be something that we want to protect and to keep outside influences away so that it can be maintained as part of a heritage or a part of a cultural identity. So for instance, there's going to be lots of different types of resistance in the next video that you're going to watch that's going to kind of reinforce all of these things that I've said in the previous lecture and this one. It is going to talk about Amish culture that resists like modern technology. I'm going to use an example of a place where I go and visit sometimes because I have friends down there in Fairhope, Alabama. It's a little community, a little town that resists popular culture insofar as they don't allow like big box stores like Walmarts and Kroger marketplaces and stuff like that to go in down there because they want to preserve a certain type of atmosphere that has mom and pop stores without the big traffic problems that these super centers can create and without the kinds of globalized product lines that you find not made in America products so often in big box stores. And we would include in that also things like Family Dollar and even Dollar General. Those kinds of things have products that are not made in the USA. And so they wanted to focus on that. And so in their county ordinance, their city ordinance for their little township in Alabama, they do not allow that kind of big box store to affect their cultural landscape. They want trees and rolling hills, not flat asphalt parking lots. Is another part of it. So it's about local beauty and local economy, supporting small business is their philosophy. So that would be an example of a local culture, whereas indigenous culture or folk culture might be the Amish, or it might be the Cherokee Nation, or it might be some kind of other Native American group. Popular culture, modern culture, think of that as the globalized kind of commodified culture where certain aspects that give a local region flavor are appropriated and then turned into some kind of money-making thing to spread from one place to the next. Your book uses an example of music festivals. And actually, in the next project that we do, I'm going to give you a documentary to watch about Afghanistan. It's called Afghan Star. I don't really know if it's more about Afghanistan or if it's about cultural appropriation or the spread of popular culture to Afghanistan, where the local culture is so entrenched in religious customs, religious traditions, religious rules, and the really strict gender roles that go along with that. So we will look at Afghan Star is the name of that video. It's about a show that was modeled after American Idol, which was such a hugely popular show in the United States. Still is, right? We have lots of spin-offs on TV to kind of compete with the fame that American Idol has had. And so that part of popular culture that changes in format so often over time spreads from the origin place. I believe American Idol is modeled after a British show originally, I believe. And so we can find the origin place of these things. How do they maintain characteristics of the original form that they were in, but also how do they change as they go to this new cultural context? And what kind of effect does that have on the local or folk culture? Are there efforts to resist the kinds of changes that could potentially occur if that kind of modern culture, infiltrates or diffuses into the local pattern? So these are interesting topics. Again, in chapter 4, look at the music festival section at least. I think it's immediately after the few sections with all these key vocabulary terms that we're looking at. So text me with questions, and I hope you enjoy the next video. It's from the Mr. Sin channel that just reinforces this, and then we'll have a couple more videos after that before we call it quits for week 9. Text me with questions.